Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. We want to take you now to Mar-a-Lago, Florida, where former President Trump is speaking after being ordered to pay more than $350 million in a New York civil fraud case.
They testified beautifully, and the judge knows that. He's just a corrupt person. And we knew that from the beginning. We knew it right from the beginning because he wouldn't give it to the commercial division. This judge thought Mar-a-Lago is worth $18 million, and it's worth anywhere from 50 to 100 times that amount. So we realized that. He ruled against me before he even got the case. He ruled against me. He said I was guilty. He didn't know what I was guilty of before he even got the case. And Letitia James, that's another case altogether. She's a horribly corrupt attorney general, and it's all having to do with election interference. There were no victims because the banks made a lot of money. They made $100 million. And by the way, I paid approximately $300 million in taxes as the migrants come in and they take over New York. I paid over this period of years over $300 million in taxes, and they want me out. Oh, let's see if we can get them out. These are radical left Democrats. They're lunatics, and it's election interfering. So I just want to thank you for being here. We'll appeal. We'll be successful, I think, because, frankly, if we're not successful, New York State is gone. People are moving out of New York State. And because of this, they're going to move out at a much faster rate. They used a statute. It's a consumer fraud statute that's never been used for a thing like this before. They used it on me because I'm running for president. I'm beating Biden by a lot. We're beating not only the Republicans, we're beating Biden by a lot. The poll came out today. We're up 20 points on Biden. If I weren't running, none of this stuff would have ever happened. None of these lawsuits would have ever happened. Nothing would. I would have had a nice life. But I enjoy this life for a different reason. We're going to make America great again. These are corrupt people. These are people that shouldn't be allowed to do the things they do. And they're using this as weaponization against a political opponent who's up a lot in the polls and always will be, because I'm competing with a man who can't put two sentences together, who doesn't know what he's doing. And we're heading into a third world war because of this guy. We have to win this election. They're doing everything possible to step in our way, but we're not going to stand for it. So thank you very much. We will get back to work. It's a ridiculous award. Listen, a fine of $355 million for doing a perfect job, for having paid back a loan with no defaults, with no problems. The banks were totally, at the trial, they testified. We had an expert witness from the Stern School at NYU that made a statement. And I was very honored by his statement. He's one of the most respected people anywhere in the country for doing this kind of thing, expert wisdom. He said, this is one of the greatest financial statements I have ever witnessed before. And he talked about even the detail. So my numbers actually were extremely conservative. They saw this, so what the judge did is he brought down certain values like Mar-a-Lago, made it ridiculous. But the expert, after having all of this, testified it's one of the best financial statements he's ever seen. And I was honored by that. But I also knew we have a corrupt judge. He's not a respected man. And again, I said before, he's been overturned on this case by the appellate division 4 times already. It's a record. Nobody's ever been overturned on one case 4 times. And I think very importantly, and I think ultimately the most important, we've employed tens of thousands of people in New York, and we paid taxes like few other people have ever paid in New York, and they don't care about that. It's a state that's going bust. It's a state that's going bust because everybody's leaving, and it's all headed up by Biden, who's destroying our country. So this is Russia, this is China, this is what you've been reading about all your lives, and it's happening right here in our country. Thank you very much. We will stop it. We will make America great again. You have my word. Thank you very much.
President Trump, sell any of the assets to pay for this verdict?
All right, you've been watching former President Trump address the New York civil fraud ruling, notably there, not answering questions from reporters. But let's go ahead and bring in right now CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman, because, Katrina, there's a lot to unpack. I don't know that we have enough time. But first of all, what do you make of what we just heard there from the former president, essentially echoing what we saw on social media in the immediate sort of moments after this ruling came down?
There was nothing surprising in there. I feel like that was very reminiscent of a lot of things that he said at the trial itself. He made a lot of campaign-type statements outside of the courtroom, continuously calling this election interference, a political witch hunt, talking about the bias against him. I'm also not surprised that he brought up the NYU professor, which is Eli Bartov. He was a witness that Trump thought was really a star for him. He paid him almost $1 million for his testimony. And the judge, in this case, Judge Engoron, did not find his testimony credible in any way. His line on him was, if you pay someone $1 million, they will say anything. And this is a very consequential judgment for him. As the AG actually laid out right before Trump spoke, it's $363.9 million plus $100 million in increase that's going to increase every day until it is paid. Yeah. So this
astounding.
Is huge for him.
Yeah, and as the former president was making his remarks there on the steps of Mar-a-Lago, it occurred to me that is the very place, right, that Judge Engoron referred to in part of his ruling, right? Talk to us a little bit about how that actually was essentially a piece of evidence that did not bode well for the former president.
Sure. I mean, there was just a lot of issues with the way that Trump was valuing properties. So with Mar-a-Lago, for instance, he valued it as a private residence. I can't remember the exact number, whereas it's actually a club. And apparently that significantly changes the valuation. And that was across the board. I think he had properties where there were rent-controlled apartments, but they valued them as though they were not rent-controlled apartments. And so there were just so many inaccuracies in these statements. He did not find Trump or many of the witnesses that he put on the stand credible either. And these were all very problematic things for Donald Trump in this trial.
Interesting to note as well that the former president's statement came minutes after the New York State Attorney General herself, Letitia James, spoke to cameras, didn't answer any questions also, but just made some statements in which she talked about the former president perfecting what she called the art of the steal over a number of years here with what she called these deceptive business practices and tremendous fraud. She also said at one point of this ruling, she said it was not only in favor of her, sort of the case that she made and her prosecuting team made, but it was also in favor of every hardworking American who plays by the rules. Explain that, Katrina, because, you know, people watching and they hear the former president saying that this is politically motivated, centered only to be a political weapon against me.
Yes.
Some people may be inclined to believe that. What is the Attorney General's perspective on this?
I mean, she's trying to say that they're really trying to lay down the law in New York and show people that these practices are not okay. And I think this is much more widespread than Donald Trump. I've heard that within the real estate industry, many people are doing these things. He is now bearing the brunt of that and possibly being used as a very big example. But another thing I want to touch on that you said is that issue of the art of the steal. I actually wrote a piece because I was really struck by how often art came up in this trial. Don Jr. actually described Trump as an artist with real estate. They tried to say that, you know, valuing properties was an art. I think actually the very last line of his lawyer, Alina Habba's closing argument is real estate is an art, not a science. So in a lot of ways, they tried to use art to explain away how they were dealing with these properties, with these discrepancies. Yeah, they were saying
creative ways, perhaps. Right?
Yeah, so that line actually really popped out to me as well.
That's interesting. As we have had a chance now to go through more of the judge's ruling, which we should point out is what, some 92 pages long. I'm wondering, Katrina, you know, you have been following this day in and day out. This is, of course, not the only cases we have been saying all afternoon that the former president is facing. And yet, when it comes to the financial impact here, it really is staggering. You touched on this a moment ago, but where does the Attorney General think this money will come from? I mean, you know, when you look at what it is right now that is coming into the former president's own sort of personal financial stream, right? This is not something that a campaign is going to be able to cover. This has to come out of his own personal reserves, essentially. So where would that money come from?
So he could potentially secure a bond. That depends if anybody will allow him to do so. He could probably sell assets off. There is a possibility that he could pay for some of this through his Save America PAC, I believe, or at least some extent of his legal fees, but they would have to fundraise quite a bit for that. So, you know, also you have to remember that he was just hit with the E. Jean Carroll ruling as well.
We just saw some video
we
of
have
that.
this, plus I believe that's about $88 million in total between the two E. Jean Carroll rulings. Donald Trump, he said he had about $400 million cash on hand. That is just not going to cover this.
And then an appeal, of course, is something that we're expecting. What would that do to a time frame here, as we are essentially in the midst of this presidential campaign?
So with the appeal, I believe that he has to appeal within about 30 days. We're still trying to confirm that timeline, but he does have to put down this money in some form, whether it's bond, whether it's cash. He has to do that as the appeal moves forward.
So the next 30 days here are going to be really critical. Do you think, Katrina, this would somehow have an impact? I mean, obviously, the other cases he's facing are very different because this is dealing with the Trump Organization. And yet I wonder if the way in which this case was prosecuted, the way in which we saw witnesses, for instance, cooperate with the prosecutor in this instance, does any of that have an impact on the other cases?
With the way that the witnesses cooperated?
Perhaps. I mean, I don't know if that's something that is answerable or not, but when you look at sort of the specter of legal challenges, right, and people see a successful ruling in favor of a prosecutor, and they see the pattern that emerged of the methodical nature of, I mean, this was, an 11-week trial?
Something like that,
It was an incredibly long, drawn-out sort of process here. You know, could there potentially be then some other future witnesses in other cases that might see that? And even though the facts in the cases are very different, they might say, well, perhaps I need to rethink my position on this.
It is, I mean, these cases against Trump have been quite successful so far. He is not doing well in New York, so there could be some truth to that. Another thing that I was thinking about yesterday, I was in the hush money trial, which is now going to be the first criminal trial to move forward. And Trump is going to have to be there. And I think he's really going to have to watch his behavior, because in the civil fraud trial, there were many times where he acted out. You know, they imposed the gag order on him, but he was a bit of an unruly defendant in that trial. And I think that that is just not going to play in the criminal court. There could be very real consequences for him. So I think that this will potentially be a different atmosphere for Donald Trump to be on trial in.
Right. March 25th is the date for that. Is that right?
That is beginning March 25th, yes.
And so what can we expect just looking forward? Because as you point out, I mean, so this is a civil trial. This case on March 25th, that is a criminal trial. Very different atmospheres.
The calendar is getting very full for Donald Trump. I mean, he has this appeal. He's going to be appealing E. Jean Carroll. He has the hush money criminal trial starting on March 25th. Lined up after that, as of now, is the Florida classified documents trial on May 20th, although depending on what happens with his immunity ruling and appeal, we could potentially even see the D.C. election interference case come up after the criminal trial. There's so much, almost like a jigsaw puzzle with all of these cases, and then there's Fulton County, and who knows what's happening with that right now. But it's going to be a very complicated timetable for him as he's campaigning for president. He's going to be stuck at the very least in a courtroom from March 25th for approximately 6 weeks during that trial.
A very busy calendar. One more before I let you go, Katrina. Just from a legal standpoint, back on the civil fraud case for a moment, what would be grounds for appeal based on what we know, based on what we may have heard from the attorneys over the course of that trial? What appears to be a legal foundation for an appeal for him?
I mean, I think that he is going to throw out everything that he can think of and really bring up a lot of the arguments that he brought up in this trial. They never viewed Judge Engoron's courtroom as a sympathetic courtroom for them. They always thought the appeals court would be a better venue. But, you know, they could say things like the valuation of property is subjective in the real estate industry. He talks often about bias. He could call this selective prosecution. He could say, you know, there were no victims. Earlier, Ricky Kleiman was talking about how there was an AP study that in 70 years of this New York law being implemented, there was never a business that was dissolved that didn't have a victim. And while Judge Engoron didn't dissolve Trump's business, he did leave that option on the table. There's an independent monitor in place at the Trump Organization, and she is ultimately, it looks like, going to make that decision. So, you know, he could just try to bring up all of these different issues.
Right. Much more to come. Katrina Kaufman, thank you so much for your analysis and reporting. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.